They shoved Anna Caldwell through the church door like she was a piece of furniture. They were finally done storing her stepmother's hand flat against her back, her stepbrother already walking away before the door swung shut behind her. She stood there in front of a stranger with a weathered face and quiet eyes, holding a carpet bag with one broken clasp, and every single person in Red Hollow waited to see the cowboy laugh. He didn't laugh. He just looked at her, really looked, and said, "You hungry? Ride was long." If you've ever been the person everyone gave up on, stay with me, because this story is for you. Subscribe now and don't move. What happens next will break your heart before it puts it back together. The morning Anna Caldwell left her father's house for the last time, nobody in Red Hollow thought to say goodbye. Her stepmother, Margaret Caldwell, née Pryor, stood at the front gate with her arms folded across her chest and an expression that looked like relief dressed up as dignity. Her stepbrother Franklin, 17 years old and already cruel in the practiced way of someone who'd learned cruelty from watching, had one hand on the gate latch and the other stuffed in his pocket. He didn't look at Anna when he spoke. He rarely did. "You've got what you need. Don't make a scene." Anna had not planned to make a scene. She had never made a scene in 25 years of living, and she wasn't about to start now, not in front of Margaret, not in front of the people. She could already feel watching from behind curtains and across fence posts. Red Hollow was a town of 800 souls, and at least 400 of them had spent some portion of their adult lives forming opinions about Anna Caldwell's body. She picked up the carpet bag herself. The clasp on the left side had broken 3 days earlier when Franklin had grabbed it to look through her things, and she'd mended it with a strip of leather cut from an old boot. It held, barely. Margaret watched her lift it without offering to help. "You'll write when you arrive, just so I know the arrangement is settled. Not so I know you're safe. Not so I know the road treated you well. So I know the arrangement is settled." "Yes, ma'am," Anna said. She walked through the gate without looking back. The wagon that would take her to the Cross Ranch was driven by a man named Eli, who worked for the stage line and had made this particular trip a handful of times before. He was a compact, sun-leathered man in his 50s who chewed tobacco and talked very little, which suited Anna perfectly. She climbed up without his help. She had learned years ago not to wait for hands that wouldn't come, and settled her bag between her feet, and the wagon rolled out of Red Hollow before the morning fog had fully lifted from the creek. She did not cry. She had cried the night before alone in the room she'd slept in since she was 9 years old, pressing her face into the pillow so Margaret wouldn't hear. By morning she had nothing left. She felt hollowed out in a way that was almost peaceful, the way a field feels after a hard frost, emptied and still, and waiting for something she couldn't name yet. Eli chewed his tobacco and drove. Anna watched the land open up around her. She had never been this far from Red Hollow. She had not been permitted to travel, not permitted to visit the counties to the south, where her father's sister lived, not permitted much of anything that might suggest she had a life that extended beyond the Caldwell household and its needs. Her father, Robert Caldwell, had been a gentleman and a weak one, and his death 14 months ago had left Anna entirely at the mercy of a woman who had never pretended to feel mercy toward her. The land here was different from the land around Red Hollow. Broader, wilder. The grass ran in long waves across the hillsides, and the sky was the kind of blue that made you feel small in a way that was almost comforting. Because if the sky was that big, maybe your problems were smaller than they felt. Anna pressed her hand against the side of the wagon and felt the vibration of the wheels moving over the packed earth, and she let herself think for the first time about what was actually happening. She was being sent to marry a man she had never met. His name was Daniel Cross. That was all she knew. Margaret had presented the arrangement 5 days ago at supper, sliding a letter across the table with the air of someone making a generous offer. "A cowboy out past Kettle Ridge. He's looking for a wife. He wrote to Reverend Moore, and Moore wrote to me." Anna had picked up the letter. Daniel Cross, it read, was 35 years old, widowed, working a small cattle operation on 160 acres outside of a settlement called Flat Creek. He was not wealthy. He had made no pretense of being wealthy. He had written his letter in plain, deliberate language, the handwriting of someone who had learned to write late and taken it seriously, and he had said that he was looking for a woman of honest character who could work beside him and share a life in the territory. He had not mentioned beauty. He had not mentioned size. He had not mentioned anything about what a woman ought to look like. Franklin had laughed when Anna set the letter down. "Perfect fit for you, isn't it, man who can't afford to be particular?" Margaret had said nothing to correct him. Margaret never said anything to correct Franklin. 5 days later, Anna was on the wagon. She did not know what Daniel Cross would say when he saw her. She had learned not to hope too specifically, because specific hopes had a way of shattering in front of an audience, and Anna's life had given her more than enough audiences for that particular performance. But she allowed herself one small private thought pressed down tight inside her chest, where nobody could reach it. Maybe he'd meant what he wrote. Maybe honest character was actually what he was looking for. Eli's wagon hit a rut and lurched, and Anna grabbed the side rail and held on, and the thought stayed where she'd tucked it alive, and fragile, and hers. They arrived at the Cross Ranch in the early afternoon. It was smaller than she'd expected. One main house and a barn that leaned slightly to the east. 3 outbuildings of varying states of repair. A corral with 4 horses. And beyond that, the long open sweep of pasture land that ran up toward a ridge of low hills. There was a kitchen garden on the south side of the house, or what had been a kitchen garden, now mostly overtaken by thistle and volunteer grasses. Anna noticed the garden immediately. She noticed the way the fencing around the corral had been patched in at least 6 different places, with different types of wood. She noticed the water trough was cracked on the south end, and losing more than it was holding. She noticed all of this in the first 30 seconds. Not because she was calculating or critical, but because she had spent her entire life being ignored by people while she paid very close attention to everything around her. Daniel Cross was coming out of the barn when the wagon rolled in. Howe was tall, not in an extraordinary way, but in the solid, unhurried way of a man who had grown into his height without making much of it. Dark hair going gray at the temples. A jaw that had been clean-shaved recently enough that she could still see a small cut just below his left ear where he'd nicked himself. He wore a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he was carrying a coil of rope that he'd slung over one shoulder, and he stopped when he saw the wagon and just paused for a moment, in a way that told her he'd been out here waiting without quite being ready. He came to the side of the wagon. Anna looked at him. Daniel Cross looked at Anna. She waited. This was the part she'd been waiting for without admitting she was waiting for it. This was where the calculation happened, the quick inventory, the barely concealed adjustment in expression that she had seen on so many faces across so many years of being looked at. The moment where someone decided what category to put her in. Daniel Cross's face didn't go through any of that. He just looked at her the way you look at a person, and then he said, "You hungry ride was long." Anna blinked. Yes, a little." "Come on then. I've got water on and there's bread from this morning if it hasn't gone hard yet." He didn't help her down from the wagon. He didn't not help her in a pointed way either. He just turned and walked toward the house, and Anna understood that this was how it was going to be. Not tenderness, not cruelty, just the practical assumption that she was capable of getting herself where she needed to go. She got herself down from the wagon. The bag came with her. The inside of the house was clean, in the way that a man's house is clean when he has been trying without quite knowing how, which meant everything was functional and almost nothing was comfortable. A table with 2 chairs, a cook stove with a coffee pot on it, a shelf of supplies, flour, dried beans, salt pork, a tin of molasses that had been organized with some attempt at logic but no particular skill. A second shelf with a few tools and a Bible that looked like it had been read, and an almanac that looked like it hadn't. Daniel poured 2 cups of water from a pitcher and set them on the table and sat down, and Anna sat across from him. He looked at her directly. Not rudely. Just directly the way people in the territory looked at each other, because in places where you couldn't afford to be wrong about a person, you learned to look. "You're younger than I expected," he said. "You're quieter than I expected," Anna said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Almost. "What did you expect?" "I didn't know. My stepmother arranged this. She didn't share many details." "What details did she share?" Anna considered the question honestly. That you were a cowboy. That you needed a wife. That you weren't. She paused, found the right word, particular. She watched him absorb that. She watched him understand what it meant, what it said about how this arrangement had been described to the other party. Is that what she said? It wasn't a question. That was the word Franklin used. He's her son. Daniel's jaw shifted. She could see him filing that information somewhere. And how'd you feel about being sent to a man who wasn't particular? The question surprised her. Nobody had asked how she felt about it. Nobody had asked how she felt about anything in a long time. I felt like it was probably better than the alternative, Anna said, which was staying. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He turned the water cup in his hands. Outside, one of the horses in the corral made a sound, and further off a bird called 3 times, and then stopped. I wrote to that reverend, he said, because I needed someone who would actually work. I've got 160 acres and 4 hands who come and go, and a cattle operation that's been losing money for 2 years. I don't need someone pretty. I need someone who's not afraid of the morning. I've never been afraid of the morning, Anna said. He looked at her. What are you afraid of? The question settled between them on the table like something he'd set down carefully, and Anna felt the ground shift slightly under her, the way it did when a conversation turned into something real without warning. She thought about Margaret's voice, about Franklin's laugh, about the way the whole town of Red Hollow had always looked at her, not with hatred exactly, but with the particular casual dismissal that was somehow worse than hatred, because it didn't even bother to be personal. Being useless, she said. Being somewhere I can't help. Daniel Cross looked at her for a long moment. Then he pushed back from the table and stood. I'll show you the place, he said. Then you can tell me what you think. They walked the property together, and Anna did something she had not entirely planned to do. She talked. Not nervously, not to fill silence. She talked the way she always talked when she was looking at something she was actually thinking about, which was directly and specifically, and without much concern for whether it sounded impressive. Your garden's been taken by thistle, she said when they reached the south side of the house. The soil underneath is still good though. I can tell by the color. You'd lose maybe 2 weeks digging it out, but you'd get it back. Daniel looked at the garden, then at her. You know soil. My father had a kitchen garden. I ran it from the time I was 11. They moved on. At the barn, Anna stopped at the trough. This is losing water, she said, crouching to look at the crack along the south seam. How long has it been like this? 6 months, maybe 8. That's a lot of water. She straightened. A lot of water is a lot of money in summer. Daniel Cross said nothing. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. At the far edge of the north pasture, he showed her the cattle, 43 head, he said, down from 62, 3 years ago. She walked the fence line and didn't say anything for several minutes. Your east fence, she said finally. What about it? It's been repaired from the inside. 7 times I counted at least. Something's getting through from the other side. She watched him go still. That's not... He stopped. How'd you see that? The patching wood faces inward on all of them. If the cattle were pushing out, you'd patch from inside, but the wood would face outward because you'd be bracing against the pressure. These are braced the wrong way. Something on the other side is pushing in. Daniel Cross stared at the east fence for a long moment. Then he turned and looked at Anna Caldwell with an expression that was not any of the things she'd been bracing herself for. It was respect. Just a beginning of it, small and cautious. But it was there. Nobody's noticed that, he said. In 2 years of losing cattle. Maybe nobody was looking, Anna said. Supper that first evening was bread and salt pork and a pot of bean soup that Daniel had started that morning and left simmering. It was edible. It was exactly edible, and nothing more. Anna ate it without complaint. She was genuinely hungry, and she was not a person who performed distaste at food that would keep her alive. But she was also quietly, and without making any sort of point of it, already cataloging what was in the supply shelf and what she might make of it tomorrow. There were 2 ranch hands who came in for supper, a man named Hector, who was broad-shouldered and Mexican, and had a long scar along his left forearm, and the careful manners of someone who'd learned to read a room fast, and a boy named Cody, who was maybe 19 and thin as a fence post, and clearly terrified of making any social error. They both looked at Anna when they came in. She'd expected that. She'd spent her whole life being looked at when she walked into a room. Hector pulled his hat off and nodded. "Ma'am." Cody said nothing, frozen in the doorway. Daniel said, and the boy startled and came the rest of the way in. They sat and ate. Hector talked some about the cattle, about a section of fence line down by the creek that needed attention, about a neighbor named Ferris, who'd offered to buy the East 40 acres at what Hector described carefully as not a full price. Anna listened. She listened the way she always listened, which was completely and without making a show of it, so that people forgot she was doing it. "What's Ferris paying per acre?" she asked. Hector glanced at Daniel. Daniel looked at Anna. "Why?" "Because I'd like to know what he thinks the East 40 is worth to him, and whether it's actually worth less, or whether he's just hoping you don't know the difference." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two men recalibrating. $4, Hector said after a moment. "And what's land selling for in the territory right now generally?" "6, maybe 7 for good pasture." "Is the East 40 good pasture?" Hector's mouth curved just slightly. "It's got a creek running through it." "Creek land," Anna said, "is worth more than open pasture, not less." She looked at Daniel. "Has Mr. Ferris been by the property recently? Has he seen the creek?" Daniel's expression had gone very still. The particular stillness of a man rethinking something he thought he'd already settled. "He came by last month," Daniel said. "Then he knows what he's offering you," Anna said. "And he knows it isn't fair." She picked up her spoon and went back to her soup. Hector was watching her with something that wasn't quite a smile, and wasn't quite surprise, and was somewhere interesting between the two. Cody was staring at her openly, clearly having abandoned any pretense of nonchalance. Daniel Cross said nothing for a long while. Then he said, "We'll talk about the East 40 tomorrow." "All right," Anna said. And that was the first night on the Cross Ranch. She slept in the small back room that Daniel had cleared out for her, on a rope bed with a corn husk mattress and 2 wool blankets that smelled of cedar. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of a place that was not. Red Hollow, different crickets, different wind, the distant occasional sound of cattle, and she felt something she hadn't felt in 14 months. Not happiness, not yet. Something quieter, like possibility, like the faintest beginning of a morning she might actually want to see. She closed her eyes. The ranch was broken in half a dozen ways she had already started counting. She thought about the east fence, and the cracked trough, and the ruined garden, and the flour in the supply shelf that was going to go to Weevil if nobody moved it to a better tin within the week. She thought about Daniel Cross's face when she'd told him about the fence posts facing inward. Nobody's noticed that, in 2 years of losing cattle. Anna Caldwell had been told her entire life that she had nothing to offer. She had been told in small ways and large ways, in words and in silences. In the particular way Margaret's eyes slid past her at the supper table, in the way the women of Red Hollow smiled at her face, and looked away from everything else, in the way her father, gentle and weak, had never once told Margaret to stop. She pressed one hand flat against the cornhusk mattress and felt the give of it. Tomorrow she would fix the flour tin, and then she would start on the garden. And somewhere down the east fence line, something was getting through that Daniel Cross didn't know about yet. But she knew. She'd seen the signs. She always saw the signs. That had never saved her before, but on the Cross Ranch, for the first time in 25 years, Anna Caldwell woke up before dawn and felt like saving was not the point. The point was the flour tin. She dressed in the dark, moving quietly, and found the kitchen by memory from the night before. The supply shelf was exactly as she'd catalogued it. Flour in a sack that had been opened and rolled shut a dozen times, the paper going soft at the folds, the kind of soft that meant moisture was getting in. She found an empty tin on the lower shelf, a lard tin that had been rinsed and set aside, and she transferred the flour carefully, working by the gray pre-dawn light that came through the single window. She had the cook stove lit and the flower safely sealed before Daniel Cross appeared in the doorway. He stopped. He looked at the stove. He looked at Anna. "You've been up a while," he said. "The flour was going to weevil. I moved it." He came into the kitchen and looked at the tin. He looked at the old paper sack she'd set aside. He picked up the sack, turned it over in his hands, and she watched him see what she had seen. The soft paper, the faint gray speckle along the bottom fold, that meant the infestation had already started at the seam. "I bought that flour 3 weeks ago," he said. "Bad storage will ruin flour faster than age. The tin should hold it now." He set the sack down. He looked at her for a moment with that unreadable expression she was beginning to catalog, the one that meant he was thinking something he hadn't decided whether to say yet. "What are you making?" he asked. "Biscuits if you have a pan. And I want to look at what's in the garden before the ground gets too warm. I need to know what's worth saving under the thistle." He pointed to a shelf where a cast iron pan sat, black and well seasoned, the best thing in the kitchen by far. Anna took it down. Daniel Cross poured himself a cup of yesterday's cold coffee and sat at the table and watched her work. He watched her the way a careful man watches something he doesn't yet understand. Not with suspicion exactly, but with attention. The kind of attention that doesn't want to miss anything. Anna didn't perform. She just made biscuits. Hector arrived at this kitchen door 20 minutes later, hat in hand, and stopped dead at the smell. "Is that biscuits?" Anna said. "Sit down. There's enough." Cody appeared behind Hector's shoulder, wide-eyed and still rumpled from sleep, and Anna waved them both in without ceremony and set the pan on the table and stepped back to find 2 more plates. The 4 of them sat together, and the biscuits were good. Not fancy, not elaborate, just good in the deep, reliable way that good biscuits are when someone who knows what they're doing makes them with decent flour and proper heat. There was molasses for the side, and Anna had found a jar of preserved peaches on the back of the supply shelf that had been there so long nobody had thought to look at it, and she'd opened it and found them still sound, bright and sweet. Cody ate 3 biscuits before he appeared to remember that he was a grown person who could control himself. Hector ate too slowly with the molasses and looked at Anna across the table. "Mrs. Cross," he said carefully, not knowing if the title fit yet. "Anna," she said. "Anna." He accepted this without comment. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" "I've been cooking since I was 10 years old. My father's kitchen, then my stepmother's. For 8 people most days." 8 people. Hector thought about this. "You do everything." "Everything in the kitchen and the garden." "Yes." Hector looked at Daniel. Daniel was looking at his plate, breaking a piece of biscuit apart with his fingers, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Hector," Daniel said without looking up, "what time are you going out to the east fence?" "After breakfast." "I'm going with you." Hector's eyebrows rose slightly. Daniel Cross had not personally ridden the east fence line in months. Hector said nothing, but Anna saw him register it, file it, understand that something had shifted. She looked at her own plate. She'd seen the signs. She went to the garden that morning. She went alone because she needed to think, and she thought better when her hands were working. She found the hoe in the smaller outbuilding, an old hoe with a cracked handle that had been rewrapped in leather cord and was still sound, and she started at the north end of the garden plot and worked south, turning up the thistle, shaking the roots, free, setting aside anything that showed promise underneath. The soil was good. She hadn't been wrong about that. Dark and slightly damp even this late in the morning, with that faint earthy smell that meant it hadn't been ruined by overuse or bad drainage. Someone, Daniel, or the woman who'd been here before Daniel, or someone before that had built this garden on good ground. She found under the thistle at the south end a row of something that had survived. Sage. And beside it, oregano gone leggy, but still alive. And in the corner, so unexpected, it stopped her completely. 2 rhubarb crowns, heavy and healthy, and entirely unbothered by neglect. Putting up new red stalks with the calm persistence of plants that had decided they were going to live regardless of what anyone else did. Anna crouched next to the rhubarb and looked at it for a moment. Then she sat back on her heels and did something she hadn't done since her father's funeral. She laughed. Not loudly. Just a small, surprised, genuine sound because the rhubarb was so exactly like something her father would have planted, stubborn and useful, and quietly refusing to give up, that it felt almost like he'd left it there for her specifically. She got back to work. Daniel and Hector came back from the east fence at midday. Anna heard them before she saw them heard the horses herd. Hector's voice saying something short and emphatic in a tone that was not his usual careful steadiness. She'd finished the south half of the garden and come in to start on something for midday, and she was standing at the cookstove when Daniel came through the door. His face told her everything. "You found it," she said. "There were 3 posts down." He moved to the table and put both hands flat on it like he needed the steadiness. 3 posts down, dug out from the other side. Not broken, dug, and the ground on the other side had tracks, not cattle tracks. He stopped. He looked at her. "Boot tracks," he said. 2 people. Coming in from the Ferris side. The word Ferris landed in the kitchen like a stone dropped in still water, and the ripples went in every direction at once. "How many cattle have you lost in the last 6 months?" Anna asked. 11 head. I thought they were wandering through breaks in the fence." "They weren't wandering," Anna said. "They were being walked out." Hector appeared in the doorway behind Daniel. His face was thunderous. "I've been fixing that fence from the inside for 8 months, Hector said. 8 months. I thought it was the cattle pushing through." "The posts were dug, not broken," Daniel said. He looked at Hector. "That's not cattle." "No," Hector said. "That's not cattle." The 3 of them stood in the kitchen, and the weight of it settled over the room. 11 head of cattle, 8 months of deliberate theft, and a neighbor named Ferris, who had come to Daniel 1 month ago with a low offer on the East 40 the 40 that had a creek running through it. The 40 that was worth more than he'd offered. "He's been reducing your herd," Anna said. She was not asking. "Reducing it and watching the ranch struggle, and then he comes in with a low offer while you're weakened enough to consider it. And if you sell him the East 40, he gets the creek." Daniel Cross looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment, and his jaw was tight, and his hands on the table were flat and still, and she watched him put all of it together in the way a man puts something together when he's been slow to see it, because he didn't want to believe it was there. "I almost sold him that land," Daniel said. "You didn't," Anna said. "Last month. I almost did. Another month of what this year's been, and I would have." She held his gaze. "But you didn't." He pushed back from the table and walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room. Hector looked at Anna. She looked back at him. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, the nod of a man who has watched a household shift in 24 hours and is not unhappy about the direction. The question now was what to do about it. Daniel was a practical man, and he approached the problem the way he approached everything, directly, and with the assumption that the answer was in the work, not in the talking. His first instinct was to ride over to the Ferris property and say his piece face to face, which was the instinct of a man with pride and no lawyer. And it was also, Anna recognized, the instinct most likely to make things worse. "Don't go to Ferris yet," she said. Daniel turned from the window. "He's stolen 11 cattle off my land." "Yes. And if you ride over there angry, he'll deny it, and you'll have nothing but tracks on the ground and a theory. He'll say the posts fell. He'll say the tracks are from his own fence riders checking the line. You'll end up in an argument, and then a feud, and he'll still have the advantage because he has more money, and he's been planning this longer than you've been watching." She watched Daniel's jaw work. "What would you do?" he asked. Not sarcastically, genuinely. "I'd document it first. You and Hector both saw the posts, both saw the tracks. Write it down today with the date, and have Hector sign it. Then I'd find out if there's a deputy or sheriff within riding distance who can come look at it officially before anything gets moved or changed." "Nearest sheriff's in Bridger," Hector said. "Day's ride." "Then one of you goes to Bridger," Anna said, "and one of you stays here and makes sure nothing happens to that fence section before the sheriff sees it. And nobody speaks to Ferris until there's someone with a badge who can hear what he says." She looked at Daniel steadily. She was not telling him what to do. She was not pretending she ran this ranch. But she had seen enough of Margaret's maneuvering enough of the way. Powerful people outmaneuvered less powerful ones by forcing them into reactions rather than actions. To know that the worst thing Daniel Cross could do right now was let his pride drive the timing. "She's right," Hector said, and then seemed surprised at himself for saying it so quickly. Daniel looked at Hector, then at Anna. He ran one hand over the back of his neck. "All right," he said. "Hector rides to Bridger at first light. I stay here." "And don't move those fence posts," Anna said. "Leave them exactly as you found them." "Yes," Daniel said, "I know." But he said it without irritation, which Anna noted. He said it the way a man says something when he's already thought of it himself and is relieved that someone else agrees. That afternoon, Anna asked Daniel if she could look at the ranch's account book. He hesitated. It was a specific personal hesitation, the kind that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with what was in the book, which was, she suspected, not good. "I'm not here to judge," she said. "I want to understand where things stand. I can't help if I don't know what I'm working with." He got the book from a locked box under the bed in his room. He set it on the kitchen table and stepped back. She opened it. The account book was 2 years of a man doing his honest best with not quite enough of anything, not enough cattle, not enough help, not enough rain. In the summer of 1883, too much in the winter of 1884. The numbers were recorded in Daniel's careful, deliberate handwriting, every entry precise and clear, which made it worse in some ways because there was no chaos to explain it. He'd kept track. He'd watched it happen and written it all down and kept going. She turned pages and didn't say anything. She followed the columns: income from cattle sales, expenses for feed and supplies, and the 2 hands' wages, the payment on the original land note that came due every quarter. She found the entry for the land note and followed it back to the beginning. She stopped. She looked at the page more carefully. "Daniel," she said. He was at the stove pouring coffee, not watching her. When did you take out the land note? What year?" 79. "Why? Who holds it? Who's your creditor?" He came to the table. "A man named Garrett. Silas Garrett. He's a moneylender out of Bridger, been in the territory about 10 years. Anna pointed to the entry. "Look at this payment. This is from October of last year." Daniel looked. "You paid $42.12, Anna said. "And the previous month you paid $41.80, and the month before that 41 even. It goes up a few cents every month." Garrett said that's how the interest calculates. "On a fixed-term loan." Anna looked at him. "A fixed-term loan has a fixed payment. The interest is calculated at the beginning and built into the payment. It doesn't go up a few cents every month unless someone is adding to it." Daniel was very still. "That's not how Garrett explained it to me," he said. "How did Garrett explain it?" Howe was quiet for a moment. "He said the interest was variable. He said it depended on the territorial lending rate." "Is that written in the loan document, the original document?" "Aye." He stopped. "I have it. I have the original." "Can I see it?" I got it from the same locked box, a folded piece of paper. The paper gone soft at the creases from being opened and refolded many times, which told Anna that Daniel Cross had read this document over and over trying to understand it. She opened it carefully and read it. Her chest went cold. The loan document was written in the dense, careful language of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and was counting on the other man not knowing what it said. The term variable interest rate appeared twice in sections that surrounded the plain language parts so thoroughly that you'd have to read the whole thing 3 times to catch it. But Anna caught it, because she had watched Margaret for 7 years, and Margaret had a gift for hiding the worst things in the middle of the ordinary ones. The rate in the document was fixed at 8%, not variable. Fixed, written clearly, 8%. But the variable clause buried in the 3rd section, wedged between a paragraph about cattle collateral and a paragraph about territorial jurisdiction, said the lender retained the right to adjust the rate in accordance with risk assessment conducted annually at the lender's discretion. He can change it whenever he decides he wants to, Anna said, based on his own assessment of risk. And if the ranch is struggling, which it is, which you've been documenting honestly in this account book for 2 years, he can declare the risk has increased and raise the rate. Daniel Cross sat down slowly in the chair across from her. "He's been raising it," he said. It was not a question anymore. Buy a small amount each month. Small enough that it doesn't feel like much. Large enough that over 2 years you've paid substantially more than you should have. He looked at the document. He looked at the account book. He looked at nothing for a moment, his hands very still on the table. "And Ferris is taking my cattle," he said quietly, the way a man speaks when he's seeing the whole shape of something for the first time. "If Garrett and Ferris know each other, if they've done this before on other properties, then you're not just dealing with a bad neighbor and a predatory lender. You may be dealing with a deliberate scheme." Anna kept her voice even. "Ferris weakens the herd. Garrett raises the rate. The ranch struggles. You sell at whatever price Ferris offers because you need the money to cover the payments. Ferris gets the creek land. Garrett gets paid. And everyone wins except you." The silence that followed was the silence of a man who has just seen the trap he's been standing in. "I've been here for 6 years," Daniel said. His voice was flat. "I built this place. 6 years." "I know," Anna said. "I thought I was just bad at it. I thought—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I thought I was the problem." She looked at him across the account book. This man she had known for exactly 24 hours. This man who had written honestly to a reverend in Red Hollow, because he needed someone real and had gotten her, instead of the capable wife he'd probably imagined, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Fury. Clean and cold and useful. Not for herself. For him. "You weren't the problem," she said. "And now we know that. The question is, what you do with it." Hector left for Bridger at first light the next morning. He took the fence posts with him wrapped in burlap in the wagon bed. Anna's suggestion, because evidence that could be moved should not be left where it could be interfered with, and he took a written account of what he and Daniel had found, signed by both of them, and he took a copy of the loan document that Anna had spent the previous evening making in her careful, even handwriting. Daniel watched him go from the yard, and then turned back to the house. Anna was at the garden. She'd been there since before dawn. She heard his footsteps crossing toward her and didn't look up. She was working through the middle section now where the thistle was heaviest, and she'd developed a rhythm. Cut the base, loosen the root lift, and turn move on that. Let her mind work on multiple problems at once. "Hector said something before he left," Daniel said, coming to stand at the garden's edge. "What did he say?" "He said—" Daniel paused, and she heard something in the pause that made her look up. His expression was complicated. "He said he'd been here 3 years, and in 3 years nobody had looked at that account book. And you've been here 2 days." Anna looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to the thistle. "I notice things," she said. "You notice a lot of things. Most people do. They just don't always think the noticing counts for anything." She felt him standing there at the edge of the garden watching her work. He stood there for a long time without speaking long enough that it would have been uncomfortable with anyone else. With Daniel Cross, it was just silence. The functional, non-hostile kind. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She kept working. "You can ask." "Back in Red Hollow, you said staying was the worst alternative." "Yes." "What was it like staying?" She brought the hoe down and turned a root. She thought about the question honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about things. "You know how you feel about this ranch right now," she said. "Knowing that people have been taking from you deliberately, and you've been working harder and harder to make up for something that wasn't your fault." "Yes, it was like that," she said. "Except I didn't have a ranch. I didn't have anything that was mine. I just had the work." She heard him exhale slowly. "And now?" he asked. She stopped. She straightened and looked at the rhubarb in the corner, the 2 stubborn crowns putting up their red stalks without anyone's permission. "And now I've got rhubarb," she said. It was a strange thing to say. She knew it was a strange thing to say. But Daniel Cross didn't laugh, and he didn't ask her to explain it, and when she looked back at him, he was looking at the rhubarb too. "My mother planted that," he said, "before she died, when this was my father's land." Anna looked at the rhubarb. She looked at him. "I'll make something with it," she said, "when there's time." "All right," he said. He went back to his work. She went back to hers. And the rhubarb kept growing red and stubborn, like something that had decided to keep its promises regardless of what anyone else did. 3 days after Hector left for Bridger, a man rode up to the Cross Ranch in the middle of the afternoon. He was well dressed for a ranch call-pressed shirt, good coat, a horse that had cost significantly more than anything in Daniel's corral. He rode with the ease of a man who owned things and knew it, and he came to the yard gate and called out before he dismounted, which was territory custom, and Daniel came out of the barn. Anna at the kitchen window watched. She could not hear the conversation clearly, but she could see it. She could see the visitor gesturing, expansive, comfortable gestures. The gestures of a man in a familiar position, making a familiar offer. She could see Daniel Cross standing with his arms at his sides, which was how he stood when he was keeping himself deliberately still. After 10 minutes, the visitor remounted and rode back the way he'd come. Daniel came into the kitchen. "That was Ferris," he said. Anna turned from the window. "What did he want?" "He heard I was having trouble. He didn't say how he heard, and he wanted to renew his offer on the East 40. He's raised it to $5 an acre." "Still below value?" "Yes." Daniel's voice was very controlled. "He also said he'd heard I'd sent someone to the sheriff at Bridger, and he wanted me to know that he hoped he used the word misunderstandings could be resolved neighborly." The word misunderstandings. Anna's jaw tightened. "He's nervous," she said. "He didn't look nervous." "No, he wouldn't. But he raised his offer, and he mentioned the sheriff in the same conversation. He knows what Hector went to Bridger about." She looked at Daniel. "Which means either he has a contact in Bridger, or he has someone watching your road. Either way, he knows you found the fence posts." Daniel Cross crossed to the table and sat down, and for a moment he looked like exactly what he was, a man who had been fighting alone for a very long time and was very, very tired. "He's better at this than I am," he said. "He's been practicing longer," Anna said. "That's not the same thing." She sat across from him. She folded her hands on the table. "Hector will be back in 2 days with the sheriff. Whatever Ferris does before then, you don't react. You be polite, and you say nothing has changed, and you give him no information. Can you do that?" Daniel looked at her. The question was genuine, and she'd meant it genuinely, and she watched him take it that way. "I can do that," he said. "Good." She pushed back from the table. "Then have supper and sleep, and let Hector and the sheriff do what they're going there to do." She went back to the stove. Behind her, she heard Daniel Cross say quietly to no one in particular, or possibly to her, "You're not what I expected." She kept her back to him. She stirred the pot. "Nobody ever is," Anna said, and she meant it about herself as much as she meant it about anyone, because the woman she was becoming on this ranch was not the woman who had climbed onto Eli's wagon in Red Hollow with a broken carpet bag and nothing left to lose. Hector came back from Bridger on the second morning as promised. He came back with the sheriff, and the sheriff was not what Anna had expected. She had expected someone large and loud and performatively authoritative, the kind of lawman who wore his badge like a declaration. Sheriff Tom Aldis was a compact gray-haired man in his mid-50s who wore his badge on his inside lapel and spoke in a voice so quiet you had to lean in to hear him. And Anna recognized immediately that this was a man who had learned a long time ago that the people who needed to shout the loudest were the ones with the least to back it up. Aldis looked at the burlap-wrapped fence posts in the wagon bed without touching them. He looked at the written account that Daniel and Hector had signed. He looked at Daniel. "You haven't spoken to Ferris since you found the posts." "He came to me," Daniel said. "I told him nothing had changed." "Good." Aldis turned to look at Hector. "And you found these exactly as described. No movement, no tampering before you wrapped them." "Exactly as found," Hector said. "I can take you to the site." "You'll take me to the site." Aldis looked back at Daniel. "And the loan document. The woman." He glanced at Anna briefly, with the neutral assessment of a man who cataloged everything. "She believes there's been fraudulent adjustment of the interest rate." "She read the original document," Daniel said. "Both versions of what the contract says." "I'd like to speak with her." Daniel looked at Anna. Anna stepped forward. She had not prepared a speech. She never prepared speeches. She just knew what she'd seen, and she said it plainly, and she watched Tom Aldous listen the way very few people in Anna Caldwell's life had ever bothered to listen completely, without his expression giving away what he thought until he'd heard everything. When she finished, Aldous was quiet for a moment. "How'd you spot the discrepancy in the loan document?" he asked. "I've lived with a woman who buried intentions in plain language for 7 years," Anna said. "You learn to read the whole page, not just the part that looks like the answer." Aldous looked at her. Something moved in his expression, not quite approval, but recognition. "You've done this before," he said. "Read contracts." "No, but I've read people. Contracts are just people written down." Aldous turned back to Daniel. "I'll need to send a letter to the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne. If Garrett has done this to other ranchers, and I suspect he has, this is a matter that goes past my jurisdiction. But the fence posts the tracks the stolen cattle, that's mine." He looked at the burlap bundle in the wagon bed one more time. "Don't sell anything," Aldous said. "Don't make any agreements with Ferris or Garrett until you hear from me. And if either of them contacts you, you send word to my office immediately." Daniel Cross nodded. Aldous rode out to the east fence with Hector, and Daniel and Anna stood in the yard and watched them go, and the morning settled around them like something that had been held too tightly and was finally allowed to breathe. "It's not over," Daniel said. "No," Anna agreed. "But now someone with authority knows it exists. That changes everything." He looked at her sideways. "Does it, in your experience?" She considered the question honestly. In her experience, which was mostly the experience of a woman with no legal standing and no property, and no one willing to take her side, power and authority were not the same thing and often ran in opposite directions. But this was different. The evidence was real. The fraud was documented. And Tom Aldous had the look of a man who found dishonesty personally offensive in a way that went past professional duty. "In this case," she said, "yes, I think it does." The letter from Cheyenne arrived 11 days later. In those 11 days, Anna rebuilt the kitchen garden, not alone. Cody, who had been circling her work schedule with increasing curiosity since the morning of the first biscuits, started appearing in the garden plot during the hours when his other duties were light, not exactly asking to help, but positioning himself close enough that she could hand him a tool without ceremony. She handed him tools. He used them without complaint and without many words, which suited them both. The thistle was cleared by the 4th day. The soil was turned by the 6th. By the 8th, she had seeds in the ground beans and squash from a dry goods order she'd helped Daniel compose, laying out exactly what was needed and what would give the highest return per square foot of bed. And on the 9th day, she'd repaired the water trough using a method Hector had sourced river clay packed into the crack and sealed with pine pitch, cheaper than replacing the trough and sound enough to last 2 more seasons. The water trough fix saved 3 gallons a day, she told Daniel. He wrote it in the account book under savings, and she watched him write it and felt something shift quietly in her chest. On the 10th day, Margaret's letter arrived. Not from Cheyenne, from Red Hollow. Anna recognized the handwriting on the envelope the moment Daniel brought in the post from the road box, because she had spent 16 years reading Margaret Caldwell's handwriting on shopping lists and correspondence, and the notes that sometimes appeared on the supper table, explaining what Anna had done wrong that day. She took the letter without saying anything and opened it in the back room. Margaret had heard apparently that Anna was settling in at the Cross Ranch. Word traveled in the territory along lines that had nothing to do with distance, moving from wagon driver to dry goods clerk to post rider and back. And what had reached Red Hollow was a version of the truth that Anna Caldwell Cross was managing the household working the land that the cowboy hadn't sent her back. The letter was 2 pages. The first page was pleasantries, or what Margaret considered pleasantries, which were the sort of polite phrases that sat over the surface of the actual message, like a thin coat of whitewash. The second page was the actual message. Margaret was having financial difficulty. Franklin had made some poor decisions. There were debts. And since Anna was now situated comfortably, that was the word, comfortably, it seemed reasonable that she might be in a position to help the family that had raised her. Anna sat with the letter in her hands for a while. She thought about the gate, the flat of Margaret's hand against her back, Franklin already walking away. The town of Red Hollow watching to see the cowboy laugh. She folded the letter. She put it in the pocket of her work dress. And she went back to the garden. She did not mention the letter to Daniel that day. The letter from Cheyenne came the next morning, and everything else stopped. Sheriff Aldous rode out himself to deliver it, which told Daniel before he even broke the seal that it was significant. He opened it at the kitchen table with Anna and Hector present, and read it slowly, with the careful attention of a man who had learned not to assume he'd understood something on the first pass. He set the letter down. "Garrett," he said. "He's done it before. 4 other ranchers in the territory. 2 of them lost their land. One of them—" He stopped. He looked at the letter again. "One of them was a man named Prescott. He lost his property 8 years ago and Ferris bought it, the east portion, with a creek." The kitchen was very quiet. "They've been working together for at least 8 years, Hector said. "At least." Aldous had his hat in his hands, and he was turning it by the brim. "The Territorial Land Office has opened an inquiry. That means a federal representative will be coming to the territory within 30 days. And in the meantime," he looked at Daniel, "your loan payments are suspended pending investigation. That's official. You can stop paying Garrett as of today." Daniel Cross said nothing for a moment. He looked at the letter. He looked at the table. He looked like a man who had just had a weight lifted off him that he'd been carrying so long he'd stopped noticing how much it bent him. "The cattle," Hector said. "The 11 head. If Ferris can't account for their whereabouts, and he won't be able to because cattle don't disappear, they go somewhere, he'll be looking at theft charges." Aldous glanced at Anna. "The loan fraud is the larger case, and that's federal. But locally I can move on Ferris within the week." Anna was looking at the letter over Daniel's shoulder. She was doing arithmetic in her head, not complicated arithmetic, but the kind that mattered, the kind that told you what a thing actually meant when you laid it against what came before. "How much did Daniel overpay?" she asked Aldous. "On the loan. Do you have an estimate?" Aldous looked at her. "Based on what your husband reported, the territorial representative estimated somewhere between $200 and $240 over 22 months. $240 was more than Daniel Cross made from his cattle operation in a good year. It was 2 years of Margaret's household budget in Red Hollow. It was the difference between a struggling ranch and a stable one." Anna looked at Daniel. He was still looking at the letter. "Daniel," she said. He looked up. "You weren't losing. You were being robbed." He held her gaze. Something in his face moved a shift so brief she almost missed it, but she'd been watching people her whole life, and she didn't miss it. It was grief and relief at the same time, the complicated feeling of being vindicated for something that shouldn't have needed vindicating. 6 years, he said quietly. 6 years I thought I was just not good enough at this. You were good enough, Anna said. Someone was working against you the entire time. Hector made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Cody in the doorway looked like he was either going to say something or start crying, and he did neither, which was the right choice. Aldous put his hat on. "I'll be moving on Ferris within the week. I'd appreciate it if you didn't warn him." "I won't go near him," Daniel said. Aldous looked at Anna one more time before he left that same neutral cataloging look, and this time Anna recognized what it held. It was professional acknowledgement, the look of someone who understood that the chain of events that had brought this case to his desk had started with a woman reading a loan document 2 days after arriving on a failing ranch. He left without saying it. He didn't need to. That evening, Anna made supper from what the garden had given her so far, and what the pantry held, and it was the best meal the Cross Ranch table had seen in longer than any of them could remember. Beans from the preserved jar, the rhubarb, finally incorporated into a sauce that she served alongside the salt pork cornbread, with a crust that had caught the heat perfectly, and at the end, a pot of coffee that was actually strong enough to mean something. Cody ate until he was embarrassed about it. Hector ate with the focused appreciation of a man who'd grown up around good cooking and had missed it deeply. Daniel ate without speaking, which by now Anna recognized as his version of a compliment. He was not a man who performed enjoyment, but when he was genuinely present at a meal, he was very present, and he was very present tonight. After the meal, After Hector and Cody had gone out to finish the evening work, Daniel stayed at the table. Anna was cleaning the cookware, her back to him, and she heard him shift in his chair. Anna. There's something I need to tell you. She turned. His expression was the most unguarded she'd seen it, not emotional in any performed way, but open like a door left ajar. When Reverend Moore wrote me, he said, he described the woman he was sending. He said she was a decent woman from a good family, hard-working, willing to settle on a ranch. Anna waited. He didn't mention... Daniel paused. He didn't describe you physically. When you got off the wagon, I wasn't prepared for... He stopped, and it was not an unkind stop. It was a man wrestling with how to say a thing honestly without hurting someone, which was its own form of respect. For me to look the way I look, Anna said. Yes. He met her eyes directly. And I need to tell you that within the first afternoon, it was the last thing in my mind. I want you to know that. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, one of the horses stamped. Anna looked at him. She had expected many things from Daniel Cross. She had not expected this, not this specific honesty, not delivered this plainly without flinching or dressing it up or making it about himself. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you've been here 11 days, and you've found a thief, a fraud, and a solution to my water trough, and you haven't asked for anything. Not acknowledgement, not gratitude, not even... He gestured slightly, for me to notice. And I think you've spent a long time around people who used not noticing as a weapon. I didn't want to be another one. Anna was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Margaret not meeting her eyes at the supper table, about Franklin's laugh, about every woman in Red Hollow who had looked at her face and then slid their gaze sideways to something more comfortable. She thought about the rhubarb. Thank you, she said, for saying it. Does it change anything? For you? She considered the question. She considered it the way she considered everything honestly and without rushing. It changes whether I trust you, she said, which changes a great deal. He nodded. He didn't push for more than that, which was the right instinct, and she noted it. She turned back to the cookware. He stayed at the table, and the kitchen held them both in its warmth, without requiring either of them to say anything else, and that was enough. For now, that was exactly enough. The trouble came on a Thursday. It came in the form of two men Anna had never seen before, who rode up to the ranch at midday, when Daniel was out on the north pasture, and Hector was in Bridger on an errand, and Cody was the only hand on the property. She heard the horses from the garden. She stood and looked. Two men well dressed in the way she'd come to associate with money that was spent on impression rather than work. They dismounted at the yard gate, and the taller one called out, "We're looking for the owner of this property." Cody appeared from the barn door, uncertain and too young and alone. Anna walked to the garden gate and through it before she'd entirely decided to. "Mr. Cross isn't on the property right now," she said. "I'm his wife. What's your business?" The taller man smiled. It was the specific smile of someone who had decided on sight that she was not going to be a difficulty. Anna had seen that smile before. She had learned what it usually preceded. "Ma'am, my name is Carter, and my associate is Mr. Price. We represent a business concern that's been in contact with Mr. Garrett regarding some outstanding financial arrangements. We understand there's been some confusion about the terms of..." "There's no confusion," Anna said. "The loan payments are suspended pending a territorial inquiry. That's official, and it was communicated in writing. If your business concern has questions, they should be directed to Sheriff Aldous in Bridger or to the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne." Carter's smile didn't change, but his eyes did. They sharpened. "Ma'am, we just want to have a conversation with..." "You're having a conversation with me," Anna said. "And I've told you what there is to tell. The inquiry is active. The payments are suspended. Anything you say to my husband, you say with a territorial representative present." She held his gaze. "Is there something else?" The man called Price, who hadn't spoken yet, glanced at Carter. Carter looked at Anna for a long moment. He looked at her the way men like him looked at women like her, making a rapid calculation about whether she was actually a wall or just the appearance of one. She could feel him deciding. "Tell Mr. Cross we'll be back," Carter said. "I'll tell him you came," Anna said. "I won't tell him you'll be back because I don't know that you will. But you're welcome to." They remounted. They rode out. Cody came to stand beside her at the gate, and she could feel him shaking slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the adrenaline of watching someone else hold a line he'd had no idea how to hold himself. "How did you do that?" he said. "I said what was true," Anna said, "and I didn't move." She watched the riders disappear over the ridge. Her heart was going fast, but her face hadn't shown it, and her voice hadn't carried it. And that was the thing about having spent your life being underestimated. You learned to use it. They thought she was just a big woman standing in a yard. They had no idea what was standing in that yard. Daniel came back to find her at the kitchen table writing. She had paper spread across the table, and she was working through numbers, cross-referencing the account book with the loan document, and a separate sheet where she'd been calculating what the ranch's actual financial position would have been without the fraudulent interest additions. He looked at the papers. "Carter and Price came today," she said without looking up. "Associates of Garrett. I sent them to Aldous." She heard him stop moving. "Are you all right?" She looked up at that. The question surprised her, not its content, but its immediacy, the fact that it was the first thing he said. "Yes, they were trying to pressure you into dropping the inquiry. But are you all right?" It was not a question about the inquiry. She understood that. She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I'm all right." He crossed to the table and looked at the papers she'd spread out. He was quiet, reading the numbers. "What is this? What the ranch actually earned versus what you actually paid. If my calculations are right, and I've done them 3 times, so they are, the Cross Ranch has been profitable. Not richly, but solidly. Every year. The losses you've been recording are losses created by fraudulent payments, not by the operation itself." Daniel Cross stood at the table and looked at 2 years of his own account book, refigured on a piece of paper by his wife of 11 days. And she watched his face go through something complicated and private and real. "The ranch isn't failing," he said slowly. "The ranch was never failing," Anna said. "Someone needed you to believe it was." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He put both hands flat on the table the way he had on that first morning when she'd told him about the fence, and he sat with the truth of it. "Garrett came to me 2 years ago," he said. "After a bad summer. He offered to restructure the loan, said it would ease the payments short term. I thought it was a lifeline." "It was a trap," Anna said. "Set by someone who knew you were proud enough to keep working and honest enough to keep paying." Daniel's hands tightened on the table. "There are other ranchers," Anna said. "You know them. Men who've been struggling the same years you have. Is there anyone who sold land to Ferris in that time?" Daniel thought. His expression shifted. "Two," he said. "The Holloways south of the ridge, and Old Man Perkins. He sold his east parcel 3 years ago and moved his family into town. Said the land wasn't worth working anymore." "East parcel," Anna said. "Did it have water on it?" The look on Daniel's face was the look of a man watching a pattern assemble itself from pieces he'd been looking at separately for years. "Creek," he said. "Yes, a seasonal creek." Anna picked up her pen and wrote both names on the sheet. "When the federal representative comes," she said, "these men should talk to him." "Perkins lost his land," Daniel said. "He sold it. It's been 3 years." "Fraud doesn't expire the day the deed changes hands," Anna said. "If the sale was made under coerced circumstances, if the pressure was created deliberately through theft and fraudulent loan terms, then the land office will want to know about it." She could see Daniel working through the implications, and she could see the moment he understood what she was saying. "You think they could get it back?" he said. "Perkins and the Holloways." "I think someone with a territorial mandate and access to Garrett's full records might find out that those sales look a great deal like the ones that already have Cheyenne's attention." She looked at him steadily. "But someone has to tell them where to look." Daniel Cross looked at Anna Caldwell Cross across the kitchen table and the papers she'd covered in careful numbers, and he said quietly, "You've been planning this." "I've been thinking about it," she said, "since the day Aldous read the letter. This goes past my ranch. past my situation. Yes. You could have just let it be about this ranch. I could have, Anna said. But I've been a person other people let things slide past my whole life. I don't want to be that kind of person myself. The kitchen was quiet. Daniel Cross was looking at her in a way he hadn't looked at her before. Not the careful assessing look of a practical man, evaluating a practical situation, but something different. Something closer. Something that had nothing to do with accounting, or fence posts, or water troughs. Anna, he said. She looked at him. He didn't finish the sentence. He seemed to decide after a moment that it wasn't the right time for whatever he'd been about to say. He looked back at the papers instead. I'll ride to Perkins tomorrow, he said, and to the Holloways. I'll have the names and the relevant loan dates written up tonight, Anna said. So you have something to show them. He nodded. He got up. He moved to the stove and poured himself coffee, his back to her, and she watched his reflection in the dark window glass, a man standing a little straighter than he had this morning. She looked back at her papers. She picked up her pen. Outside the ranch was quiet, and the night was coming down over the hills, and somewhere in Bridger Tom Aldous was building a case, and in Cheyenne a territorial representative was reading a letter that Anna Caldwell had helped write without knowing she was writing it, just by reading a loan document clearly and saying what she saw. She had been told her entire life that she had nothing to offer. She had been offered to a man who couldn't afford to be particular, and she had walked onto a failing ranch and found within 11 days that it wasn't failing at all. She pressed the pen to paper and kept working, and the lamp burned steady, and the night held the house, and somewhere in the east corner of the garden. And the rhubarb put up another new stalk in the dark, stubborn and red, and entirely indifferent to whether anyone was watching, which was exactly how Anna Caldwell had lived her whole life, and exactly how she intended to keep living it. Daniel rode to see Perkins the next morning. He left before Anna finished the breakfast dishes in his inside coat pocket with the careful precision of a man handling something important. He didn't say much before he left. He didn't need to. He looked at the papers, once looked at her and said, "I'll be back before dark." She believed him. She'd learned in these 12 days that Daniel Cross said exactly what he meant and meant exactly what he said, no more and no less. And that this quality, which seemed simple on its surface, was in fact one of the rarest things she'd encountered in a human being. Hector stayed close to the property. Anna had not asked him to. He'd simply arranged his work to keep himself within range of the yard, which told her he understood the situation without needing to be briefed on it. Carter and Price had come once. People like Carter and Price, in Anna's experience, rarely came just once. She was right. They came back at mid-morning this time with a third man she didn't recognize, heavy-set and dressed in the formal coat of someone who worked indoors. A clerk or an attorney. She assessed in the first 3 seconds someone who carried documents rather than tools. They rode into the yard, and the attorney type dismounted with the deliberate ease of someone accustomed to arriving at properties where he was not welcome and had legal standing to be there anyway. Hector came out of the barn. Anna came out of the house. "Mr. Cross isn't here," she said before any of them spoke. Carter tipped his hat. "Mrs. Cross, this is Mr. Tillman. He represents a legal concern of Mr. Garrett's and has some documents he needs to." "Mr. Garrett's loan arrangements are under territorial inquiry," Anna said. "Any legal documents related to that loan need to be filed with the inquiry office in Cheyenne or delivered to Sheriff Aldous in Bridger. Not to this property." Tillman stepped forward. He had a leather case under his arm and the expression of a man who had prepared for resistance and found it mildly interesting rather than deterring. "Mrs. Cross, these documents are time-sensitive. They relate to a notice of—" "I'm not able to accept legal documents on my husband's behalf without his presence," Anna said. "That's not stubbornness. That's legal fact. You'd know that being an attorney." Tillman paused. A very small pause, but she caught it. "If you're here in an official capacity," she continued, "then you understand that serving documents to a spouse in the absence of the named party during an active territorial inquiry is a procedure that the inquiry office will find extremely interesting, especially given that Mr. Garrett has been notified of the inquiry's status." The yard was quiet. Hector stood at the barn door with his arms folded, not moving, not speaking, just present in the way that large, capable, silent men are present when they want to communicate something without saying a word. Tillman looked at Anna. He looked at Hector. He looked back at Anna. "We'll return when Mr. Cross is available," he said. "I'll let him know you came," Anna said. "He'll be in contact with Sheriff Aldous today. You might find it efficient to speak to Aldous directly." Tillman remounted. Carter and Price didn't look at her on the way out. The third time they underestimated her, she thought was starting to feel like a pattern she could use. Hector waited until they were over the ridge. "You knew they'd come back," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the observation of a man recalibrating his assessment of a situation. "People like that always come back," Anna said. "Garrett knows the inquiry is moving. He's trying to get something signed or served before the federal representative arrives. If he can get Daniel to acknowledge the loan terms in any way, to accept a document, to make any kind of written response, it creates a record that complicates the inquiry." Hector looked at her. "How do you know this?" he asked. Not unkindly, genuinely. "My stepmother," Anna said. "She spent 7 years maneuvering my father's estate into her own name, slowly. A signature here, an acknowledgement there. By the time he died, everything was already arranged." She looked out over the ridge where Tillman's dust was still settling. "I know exactly how this works." Hector was quiet for a moment. "We're lucky you're here," he said. Anna looked at him. She didn't deflect it. She didn't minimize it. She just took it for what it was, the honest opinion of a man who didn't say things he didn't mean, and she nodded. "So am I," she said. Daniel came back before dark as promised. He came back with Perkins. Thomas Perkins was in his 60s, a weathered, deliberate man who walked with a slight hitch in his right knee and said very little until he had something specific to say. He sat at the kitchen table across from Anna and looked at the papers she'd laid out. His own loan figures, reconstructed from memory and cross-referenced with what Daniel had brought, and his expression didn't change much. But his hands folded on the table, tightened until the knuckles went light. "I sold the east parcel," he said. 3 years ago. Ferris gave me $4 an acre." "The parcel had a seasonal creek," Anna said. "Yes." "And before you sold it, had you been losing cattle from the north fence?" Perkins looked up at her. Something in his eyes shifted. 14 head, he said. "Over 2 years. I thought it was the winter of '82. I thought they went in the cold. In winter." Anna said, "Cattle that die from cold are found. They don't disappear." She looked at him steadily. "Did you find them?" Perkins was very still. "No," he said. "I didn't find them." Daniel, sitting at the end of the table, said nothing. He'd heard this version of the story for the first time that afternoon, riding back from Perkins's place in town, and Anna watched him listen to it again with the expression of a man who understood that his own story was not the only one of its kind. "Mr. Perkins," Anna said, "the Territorial Inquiry in Cheyenne is looking at Garrett's loan practices across multiple properties. If your loan shows the same fraudulent interest adjustments as Daniel's, and I believe it will, then you may have a claim. Not just for damages, for the land itself." Perkins looked at her. He looked at Daniel. He looked back at Anna. "I signed the deed," he said. "The land's been in Ferris's name for 3 years. You signed under circumstances that were deliberately engineered to leave you no other choice," Anna said. "Your herd was reduced by theft you had no reason to suspect. Your loan was inflated by fraud you had no way to read in the document. And then Ferris arrived with an offer at exactly the moment you couldn't afford to refuse." She held his gaze. "That's not a sale. That's coercion with paperwork." Thomas Perkins sat with that for a long time. His hands on the table slowly unclenched. "My wife," he said. "She cried when we left that land. She didn't say anything, but she cried." The kitchen was very quiet. "Will you talk to the federal representative when he comes?" Anna asked. "Yes," Perkins said. "I'll talk to him." The Holloways sent word 2 days later that they'd received Daniel's letter and would come to the Cross Ranch on Saturday, which gave Anna 3 days to prepare what she was already privately thinking of as the full accounting. She spread it across the kitchen table and worked at it in the evenings after supper. after the dishes were done, cross-referencing every figure she could reconstruct against the documents at hand. The pattern was elegant in the way that calculated cruelty is sometimes elegant, efficient layered, designed to be invisible until it was too late. Garrett held the loans. Ferris weakened the herds. The timing was precise enough that no single rancher's experience looked like anything other than bad luck, bad seasons, bad management. But laid side by side on Anna's kitchen table in the lamplight, it looked exactly like what it was. On the second evening, she found the letter from Margaret still folded in her dress pocket. She'd been carrying it for nearly 2 weeks without deciding what to do about it. She took it out now and read it again in the lamplight and felt the same complicated weight she'd felt the first time. Not grief exactly, because she had run out of grief for Margaret's choices years ago, but something older and more persistent. The particular heaviness of someone who'd hoped for better from a person who'd had every opportunity to be better. Margaret wanted money. Franklin had debts. The family that had shipped Anna off to a stranger was now circling back because the stranger hadn't returned her. Anna folded the letter and set it on the table beside her accounting papers. She thought about what her father would have said. Robert Caldwell, gentle and weak, who had loved his daughter in the helpless way of a man who never found a way to translate love into protection. He would have said to be generous. He would have said that bitterness cost the person carrying it more than the person who caused it. He would have been right. He was usually right about the things that cost him nothing personally to be right about. She was still thinking about it when Daniel came in from the evening check. He saw the letter on the table. He didn't ask about it. He had the decency not to read things that were clearly personal, but he glanced at it and she saw him register that it was there. "From Red Hollow," she said. He poured water and sat down across from her. "Margaret. She's having financial difficulty. She wants help." Daniel's expression didn't change much, but something around his eyes went careful. "What kind of help?" "Money. Franklin made poor decisions apparently." "And she's asking you?" "She's asking me." Anna looked at the letter. "Because the cowboy didn't send me back. Because I'm comfortably situated." Her word. Daniel looked at the accounting papers spread across the table, the work she'd been doing every evening for 2 weeks. The figures that were slowly building a case that would bring a federal representative to their door and possibly return Thomas Perkins' land to his wife, who had cried when she left it. "What are you going to do?" he asked. She picked up the letter. She folded it again. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I'm still deciding what I owe her." "What do you think you owe her?" Anna considered it. She considered it the way she considered everything, without rushing, without letting pride or anger drive the answer before the honest one arrived. "Nothing," she said. "But what I think I owe her and what I'll do about it are 2 different questions." Daniel nodded. He didn't push. He didn't offer his opinion on Margaret, which was wise of him, because whatever she decided, it needed to be hers. "There's something else," he said. She looked at him. He reached into his coat and put a folded paper on the table beside the accounting sheets. She recognized the seal at the top before she unfolded it. The Territorial Land Office. "That came with the Bridger this afternoon," he said. "The federal representative arrives in 3 weeks. He's requested that all parties in the inquiry be present and that documentation be gathered prior to his arrival." Anna looked at the letter. 3 weeks. "We're ready," she said. "Are we?" She looked at the accounting papers. She looked at the letter from Cheyenne. She looked at Daniel Cross sitting across the kitchen table from her in the lamplight. This man she had known for 2 weeks and trusted more than people she'd known her whole life. "We will be," she said. The Holloways came on Saturday. James Holloway was younger than Perkins, early 40s, still actively ranching the portion of his property that Ferris hadn't acquired, and he brought his wife Ruth, which Anna hadn't expected and was glad of. Ruth Holloway was a small, precise woman who had clearly been doing her own accounting in her own head for years, and she sat down at the kitchen table and looked at Anna's papers, and within 10 minutes was adding to them from memory. "August of '83, Ruth said. "That's when Garrett restructured our loan. He came to the house himself. He said it was a special arrangement, that he was doing it as a courtesy because James had been such a reliable borrower." Her voice was absolutely flat. 6 months later, we started losing cattle. From the east fence? Anna asked. Ruth looked at her. From the east fence. The 5 of them sat around the table. Anna Daniel Perkins, James Holloway, Ruth Holloway, and the story assembled itself from pieces that had been separate for years, and the assembling of it was terrible, and clarifying at the same time, the way it always is when you finally see the shape of something that's been pressing on you from the dark. By the time they finished, Anna had 4 pages of documentation covering 3 properties, 2 loans, 6 years of fraudulent interest adjustments, and estimated 42 head of cattle stolen from 3 ranches combined. She looked at what she'd written. She looked at the people around the table. "This," she said carefully, "is what the federal representative needs to see." James Holloway looked at his wife. Ruth Holloway looked at the papers. Thomas Perkins looked at the window. "If we do this," James said, "Ferris will know." "He already suspects," Anna said. "Carter and Price have been to this property twice. He knows the inquiry is widening. The question isn't whether he'll know. The question is whether the law knows first." "We have 3 weeks," Daniel said. "If we get this to Aldous, he can have it in Cheyenne before the representative arrives." Perkins turned from the window. "And if the representative decides there's not enough, if Garrett's lawyers are better than what we've got?" Anna looked at him. She thought about everything she'd seen in the last 2 weeks. The fence posts, the account book, the loan document, the carefully buried variable clause. The pattern of it, laid against the pattern of other ranches, losing cattle from the east fence line in the same seasons. "The representative isn't coming to find reasons to do nothing," she said. "The Territorial Land Office sent him because they already believe something is wrong. We're giving him the proof. That's different from asking him to take our word." The room was quiet. Ruth Holloway looked at Anna across the table. "You're good at this," she said. "Not as a compliment exactly, as an observation." "I've had a great deal of practice noticing things people hoped I wouldn't," Anna said. Ruth held her gaze for a moment, and something passed between them that didn't need words. The mutual recognition of women who had spent long years being underestimated by people who thought underestimation was the same as safety. "All right," Ruth said. "What do we do?" They sent Hector to Aldous the following morning with a package of documents that Anna had spent the previous night organizing and copying in duplicate one set for Aldous, one set that Daniel locked in the strongbox with the original loan papers. She had been awake until nearly 2 in the morning. Daniel had stayed up with her not because she asked him to, but because at some point past midnight he'd brought 2 cups of coffee to the table and sat down and started organizing the secondary copies while she wrote, and they'd worked together in the lamplight without speaking much, and it was the most natural thing that had happened in an entirely unnatural 2 weeks. At one point, somewhere in the second hour, Daniel looked up from the copies he was ordering and said, "You know what this reminds me of?" She looked up. "What?" "Those letters I wrote, when I was trying to decide what to put in the notice to Reverend Moore." He paused. "I wrote 4 drafts. Every time I got to the part about what I was looking for, I crossed it out and started over, because what I wrote kept sounding insufficient. Like I didn't know how to say it." "What were you trying to say?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was trying to say that I needed someone real. Not someone who fit a particular picture. Just real." He looked at the papers he was stacking. "I didn't know how to say that without it sounding like I was making excuses for not being able to offer more." Anna looked at him across the lamplight and the papers that might save 3 families' land. "You offered a real life," she said. "That's more than most." He looked up. His eyes in the lamplight were steady and dark and completely without pretense. Anna," he said, and then stopped. She waited. "I know we haven't. I know it's only been—" He stopped again. He was not a man who fumbled words often. The fumbling was its own kind of declaration. "Daniel," she said gently. He looked at her. "Finish the copies," she said. "We can say the rest of it when it doesn't need to compete with a federal inquiry." He looked at her for another moment. Then something at the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the particular expression she'd come to recognize as his version of one, the expression that meant he'd been surprised into warmth by something he hadn't expected. He looked back down at the papers. They finished the copies. It was past 2 in the morning when they were done. 3 days before the federal representative was due to arrive, Ferris made his move. Not Ferris himself. His men, not Carter and Price this time, but a different pair, rougher and less formally dressed, the kind of men who were hired for situations that required less conversation. They came at dawn before the household was fully moving, and they didn't come to the main gate. They came to the east fence. Cody saw them first. He was doing the morning water rounds, and he came back to the house at a dead run, breathless face, pale. 2 men, he got out. East fence. They've got the posts. Anna was dressed and moving before Cody finished the sentence. She found Daniel in the yard, already striding toward the barn, already thinking horse. "Wait," she said. He turned. His face was hard. "If you ride out there and confront them, they'll say they were doing fence repair," she said. "You'll end up in a physical altercation, and Ferris will have exactly what he wants. Grounds to say, you're unstable, that the inquiry is driven by a personal dispute. Don't give him that." "They're destroying evidence," Daniel said. His voice was tightly controlled, in the way of a man who was holding something back with considerable effort. "Yes, and Hector rode to Bridger yesterday with the copies. Aldous already has everything that was documented." She held his gaze. "The physical posts matter, but the documentation matters more. Let them take the posts. Send Cody for Aldous now so the sheriff arrives and sees what they're doing." Daniel Cross stood in the yard, and she watched him make the decision. She watched him choose the slower, harder, smarter thing over the fast and satisfying one, and she understood what it cost a man of his temperament to do it. "Cody," he said. The boy appeared instantly. "Ride to Bridger, fast as the gray can go. Tell Aldous there are men on my east fence destroying evidence. Tell him I need him here today." Cody ran. Daniel turned back to Anna. His jaw was set. "And now we wait." "Now we wait," she said. They waited. It was one of the harder things Anna had done in 2 difficult weeks, because waiting while something unjust was happening within shouting distance of where she stood required the precise same discipline that she'd had to build over 25 years of being in rooms where she was ignored, the discipline of knowing that the reaction they wanted from you was the one you must not give. Hector stood with them. The 3 of them stayed in the yard, close enough to observe, far enough not to engage. And the 2 men at the east fence worked for the better part of 2 hours, pulling posts, loading the burlap-wrapped originals into their wagon, doing whatever Ferris had paid them to do with the quiet efficiency of men on a schedule. When they finished, they rode out without looking toward the house. Daniel watched them go. His hands were at his sides. "I want to be wrong about this," he said. "I want there to be some version of this where Ferris didn't know exactly what he was doing." "There isn't," Anna said. "No," he agreed. "There isn't." Aldous arrived 2 hours later. He was alone, which meant Cody had found him close, or he'd already been riding this direction. He came to the yard gate and looked at Daniel. They took the posts. Both sets, the originals and the replacements. "Did you have copies of the documentation?" "Hector brought you copies 3 days ago." Aldous nodded. He looked at the east fence line in the distance, the gap where the post had been. He looked back at Daniel. "That's destruction of potential evidence in an active federal inquiry," he said. "That's not my jurisdiction anymore. That's Cheyenne's." He looked at Anna. "The documentation you sent. Can you swear to its accuracy?" "Every figure I wrote is taken directly from the account book," Anna said, "which Daniel has in the original. And every figure I crossed against the loan document is in the document which is in the strongbox." "You'll swear to that before the federal representative?" "Yes." Aldous turned his horse. "I'm going to Ferris," he said. "Officially, today." "Is that wise?" Daniel asked. "Before the representative arrives. It's not about wisdom at this point." Aldous looked back over his shoulder. "He destroyed evidence on an active inquiry. That's not a land dispute anymore. That's obstruction." He settled his hat. "Stay here, both of you. Don't go to Ferris. Don't send anyone to Ferris. Let me do my job." He rode. Daniel and Anna stood in the yard, and the morning settled around them. and Daniel Cross put his hand over his face for a moment, just a moment, and breathed. Then he lowered his hand. "You kept me from riding out there this morning," he said. "Yes. If I'd ridden out there, Aldous would have arrived to find a confrontation instead of evidence collection. Ferris's men would have witnesses saying you were aggressive. The inquiry would have had a different story to deal with." He looked at her. "You thought all of that out?" "I've had a great deal of practice," she said again. "Keeping still when every part of you wants to move." He looked at her for a long moment. The morning was bright around them, and the ranch was exactly as it had always been. The barn leaning slightly east, the corral with its horses, the kitchen garden with its new growth visible from here, the rhubarb in the corner putting up its red stalks, and it was exactly as it had always been, and entirely different from what it had been 2 weeks ago. "I want to tell you something," Daniel said. "All right. When I saw you get down from that wagon—" He stopped. He was choosing each word carefully the way he'd written those 4 drafts of the letter to Reverend Moore. I made an assessment. Fast. The way you do when you're used to things being hard. I thought this is a woman who has been treated badly. I thought I'll be decent to her. I thought that was what I could offer." Anna looked at him. She didn't speak. "I didn't think—" He paused. "I didn't think I was looking at the person who was going to save my ranch. I didn't think I was looking at someone I was going to want to know." He met her eyes directly. "I didn't think I was looking at someone I was going to want beside me." The yard was quiet. Somewhere above them, a hawk called once and went silent. "Daniel," she said. He waited. "I came here with a broken bag and no expectations, and the specific intention of making myself indispensable so you couldn't send me back," she said. "That was my plan. I was practical about it." "I know," he said. "I worked that out about day 3. And now it's not about indispensability," he said. "That's what I'm trying to say. It stopped being about that somewhere around the rhubarb." Anna Caldwell Cross looked at this man who had asked her if she was afraid of the morning, who had not laughed when he saw her get down from the wagon, who had stayed up past 2 in the morning, making document copies because she needed the help and he wanted to give it, who had kept himself from riding out to the east fence because she'd asked him to trust a harder path. She had spent 25 years being told she was too much in the ways that didn't count and not enough in the ways that did. She had spent 25 years wondering if the person she was when no one was looking. Careful, observant, tireless. The person who noticed the fence posts and the flower and the rhubarb was actually worth anything to anyone. "I came here practical," she said. "I'm not entirely practical about it anymore either." He didn't reach for her. He didn't make it into something performed. He just looked at her, and she looked back, and the morning held them both in it. "All right," he said finally. "All right," she agreed. And when they went back inside, they went back as 2 people who had said the true thing and didn't need to dress it up. And the ranch waited around them, and 3 weeks would bring a federal representative, and the inquiry would do what it was going to do. And Thomas Perkins's wife might get to stop crying about the land she'd lost, and Margaret's letter was still in Anna's pocket, and still unanswered, and the rhubarb was still growing. And for the first time in her life, Anna Caldwell did not feel like she was waiting to see if she would be allowed to stay. She was already home, and that knowledge, quiet and absolute, settled into Anna Caldwell Cross. Like water finding its level, like something that had been searching for a long time, and had finally stopped. The federal representative arrived on a Tuesday. His name was Harlan Webb, and he came from Cheyenne with 2 assistants, a leather case the size of a small trunk, and the brisk, organized energy of a man who had done this before, and understood that what he was walking into was never just about numbers on paper. He was younger than Anna expected, mid-40s, clean-shaven, with the kind of precise, unhurried manner that told her he'd learned long ago that showing urgency gave the other side information they could use. He came to the Cross Ranch first. Anna had the kitchen table cleared and the documentation laid out in order before his horse was through the gate, original loan document account book, her handwritten calculations, in duplicate the signed statements from Perkins and both Holloway's, and the letter from the Territorial Land Office, with its official seal face up at the top of the stack. Webb walked in, looked at the table, looked at Anna, and said, "You prepared this?" "Yes." He pulled out the chair and sat down without further preamble and began reading. Daniel stood near the wall. Hector stood in the doorway. Cody was outside with the horses, which was where Cody functioned best when things got formal. Webb read for 20 minutes without speaking. He turned pages carefully, going back twice to cross-reference figures. He had a small notebook, and he made notes in it quick and precise, and Anna watched his hand and tried to read the notes from across the table, and mostly couldn't. Finally he looked up. "The variable clause," he said. "You identified it from the original document." "Yes, it's in the third section between two paragraphs written in plain language. Easy to miss if you read the document looking for confirmation of what you'd been told, rather than reading it, looking for what it actually says." "And you read it the second way." "I read everything the second way," Anna said. Webb looked at her for a moment, not unkindly, assessingly. "Mrs. Cross, have you had legal training?" "No." "Business training?" "No." He looked at the papers again. He looked at the reconstruction she'd done, the 4-page spread that laid Garrett's scheme against 3 properties across 6 years. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. Anna thought about Margaret. About 7 years of watching a woman maneuver property and money and people with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that power operated through paperwork and patience, not noise. "I learned it from watching someone do the same thing on a smaller scale," she said. "And from paying attention when other people assumed I wasn't." Webb held her gaze for one more moment. Then he turned back to the papers. "I'll need to speak with Mr. Perkins and the Holloways separately," he said. "And I'll need access to Mr. Cross's strongbox to verify the originals against these copies." "Everything is available," Daniel said. "Good." Webb closed his notebook. "I want you to understand the scope of what this represents. If my findings confirm what you've documented, and I believe they will, we're looking at systematic fraud across a minimum of 5 properties over at least 8 years. Garrett's license to operate as a territorial lender will be revoked. The fraudulent interest charges will be subject to restitution. And the land sales made under coerced circumstances." He paused and he looked at Daniel directly. "Will be reviewed by the land office for potential reversal." The kitchen was absolutely still. Anna heard Daniel breathe in slowly. "Perkins," Daniel said. "The east parcel. If the coercion can be established and what Mrs. Cross has documented is a strong foundation, then yes, the Perkins sale will be among those reviewed." Daniel looked at Anna. She looked back at him. She thought about Thomas Perkins' hands tightening on the kitchen table. She thought about his voice saying, "My wife cried when we left." "How long?" Daniel asked Webb. "For the review process." "The initial findings will go to Cheyenne within 30 days of my return. Formal hearings will likely be scheduled for late spring." Webb stood gathering his papers with that same brisk efficiency. "It isn't fast, but it moves, and it moves in one direction." He shook Daniel's hand. He nodded to Hector. He turned to Anna last. "Mrs. Cross," he said, "the Territorial Land Office owes you a debt. This level of documentation prepared without legal training and without being asked is—" He paused as if choosing the word carefully, "exceptional." Anna looked at him. She didn't deflect it. She didn't minimize it. "I know what it looks like when someone is being taken from," she said. "And I know what it costs to not say anything." Webb held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up his case and walked out. Aldous arrested Ferris that same afternoon, not for the cattle. Not yet, though the cattle charges were coming, but for obstruction of a federal inquiry, which was the charge that attached to what his men had done to the east fence posts 3 days earlier. The arrest happened in Bridger, in front of the land office, in front of 12 witnesses, which was not an accident. Aldous understood, as Anna had understood from the first time she'd seen him turn his badge inside out, that the most effective justice was the kind that happened where people could see it. Word reached the Cross Ranch by evening. Cody brought it, having heard from a rider on the Bridger Road, and he came in breathless and bright-eyed and told it in a rush that required Anna to ask him twice to slow down. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then Hector said something in Spanish that Anna didn't understand, but recognized by the tone as the kind of thing you say when something that should have happened a long time ago finally does. Daniel sat at the table and said nothing. Anna looked at him. His face was doing the complicated thing again, the thing she'd learned to read, the thing that looked like stillness, but was actually a great deal of feeling, moving through a man who didn't have the habit of letting it show. "Daniel," she said. He looked up. "It's over," she said. "Not all of it. Not the hearings, not the restitution, not Perkins's land. But the part where they could keep doing it, that's over." He nodded. He pressed his hands flat on the table, the way he always did when he needed something solid beneath him. 6 years, he said. Quietly. Just that. 6 years, she agreed. And it stopped here. He looked at her across the table, and she looked back, and the kitchen held them both in its warmth, and neither of them needed to say the rest of it, because the rest of it was already understood. Margaret's letter had been waiting in Anna's pocket for 17 days when she finally wrote back. She sat at the kitchen table in the early morning before anyone else was up with the lamp low, and her pen and the paper that Daniel had gotten from the dry goods order, and that she'd been conserving for documentation work, and she thought carefully about what she wanted to say. She was not angry. She had decided somewhere in the 17 days that she was not going to spend her energy on anger toward Margaret, because anger required attention, and attention was a resource, and she had better places to put it. She was also not going to send money. That decision had taken longer to reach, not because she felt guilty about it, but because she'd been raised in a house where guilt was the primary currency, and old habits were persistent things. She wrote the letter plainly. She told Margaret that she had received the letter. She told her that she hoped Franklin's situation could be resolved, and that she sincerely meant that hope, because Franklin was young, and young men's bad decisions didn't have to define them if someone held them accountable early enough. She told Margaret that she was not in a position to send financial assistance, which was true in the sense that the ranch's resources were still stabilizing, and truer in the sense that sending money to Margaret would be teaching Margaret that Anna was still available to be used. She told Margaret that if there was genuine legal trouble, Reverend Moore might be able to connect Franklin with someone in Cheyenne who handled debt arrangements, and then she wrote the last paragraph. She told Margaret that she was well. She told her that the ranch was good land with good people on it. She told her that she had found in the past several weeks that a life built on honest work and honest partnership was worth more than she had known how to hope for when she walked out of that gate with a broken bag. She did not say, "You gave me away like furniture, and I landed on my feet." She didn't need to. Margaret would read between those lines. Margaret was very good at reading between lines. She sealed the letter. She set it with the outgoing post. When Daniel came in for breakfast and saw it there, he glanced at it and then at her. "You answered her," he said. "Yes." "What did you say?" "That I'm well," Anna said, "and that I won't be sending money." He looked at her for a moment. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. She considered the question honestly, which was the only way she knew how to answer him. "Like I closed a door," she said. "Not with anger. Just closed it." He nodded. He sat down. She put breakfast on the table, and the morning moved forward, and the door was closed, and she did not feel diminished by having closed it. She felt, if anything, lighter. The rhubarb was ready by the second week of May. It had been growing since Anna's first morning in the garden, red and reliable, putting up new stalks with the steadfast persistence of something that had made a decision about surviving and intended to honor it. She'd been watching it for weeks, and when she finally cut the stalks, 14 of them more than she'd expected, she brought them inside and stood at the kitchen counter and felt the specific satisfaction of a thing coming ready in its own time. She made a pie. She hadn't made pie since her father's kitchen, since the years before Margaret, since the time when the house on the edge of Red Hollow had still sometimes felt like a home. She made the crust from the good flour in the sealed tin, and she made the filling with the rhubarb and the last of the preserved sugar from the back shelf, and a handful of dried strawberries from a tin that Hector had brought back from Bridger 2 weeks earlier, without explaining why, though Anna suspected he'd been listening when she mentioned the rhubarb. She put the pie in the oven, and the smell of it moved through the house and out into the yard, and she knew when Daniel smelled it, because she heard him stop moving somewhere near the barn, the pause in his footsteps carrying all the way to the kitchen window. He came in while it was still cooling. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the pie on the counter, and he looked at Anna, and he had an expression that she had never seen on his face before. Something young almost surprised the expression of a man encountering something he had not let himself expect. "My mother used to make rhubarb pie," he said. "I know," Anna said. "You told me she planted the crowns. I didn't think anyone would ever—" He stopped. He looked at the pie again. "I forgot what this smelled like." Anna looked at him. She had been watching him carefully for weeks now, watching the way he moved through the world. Practical, deliberate, decent, slow to trust and thorough when he did. And she had spent weeks watching him remember slowly that the ranch was good land, and the work was honest work, and that the person beside him was not going anywhere. She had watched him remember that he was allowed to want things. "Sit down," she said. "I'll cut it." He sat down. Hector came in from outside, drawn by the smell, with the straightforward honesty of a man who didn't pretend not to be hungry. Cody appeared behind him, and there was a moment where the four of them were crowded around the kitchen table with a rhubarb pie cooling on the counter, and the afternoon light came through the window, and the ranch was quiet outside, and everything that had happened in the past 7 weeks. The fence posts, the loan document, the accounting papers, Webb and Aldous and Carter and Price and Margaret's letter, and Thomas Perkins' hands tightening on the table. All of it sat at a slight distance, not gone, not forgotten, but settled into the past where it belonged. Anna cut the pie and served it. The first bite made Cody close his eyes, which was the most genuine food response she'd seen from anyone since she arrived. Hector ate slowly and quietly, and when he finished, he looked at Anna and said simply, "Thank you." Daniel ate his piece without speaking. He ate it with the focused, complete attention that she'd learned was his highest compliment. When he finished, he put down his fork and looked at the pie plate and then at her. "Anna," he said. She looked at him. "Marry me properly," he said. "Not the arrangement, not what got you here. I want to ask you properly." The kitchen was so quiet, she could hear the horses in the corral. Hector and Cody both became extremely interested in their pie plates. Anna looked at Daniel Cross across the kitchen table, this man who had asked her on the first morning if she was hungry, who had looked at her the way you look at a person who had noticed that she'd fixed the flour tin before he'd even had his coffee, who had stayed up past 2 in the morning, making document copies, and not made a thing of it, who had kept himself from riding out to the east fence because she'd asked him to trust a harder path, who had told her the truth about the first moment and let her decide what to do with it. "Yes," she said. "I'll marry you properly." Cody made a sound that he immediately tried to disguise as a cough. Hector, who was a man of great dignity and restraint, allowed himself a single brief smile before returning his expression to its usual composure. Daniel Cross looked at Anna Caldwell with something in his face that she had never in her life seen directed at her. Not admiration from a distance, not the careful appreciation of someone who'd decided to be kind, but the steady, particular, entirely personal look of a man who has found the specific person he intends to spend his life beside. "Good," he said. "Just that. Good." Said the way he said everything completely and without excess. She smiled at him. And he looked at her smile with the expression of a man who had been handed something he'd forgotten he was allowed to have. The formal hearings in Cheyenne were held in late spring. Daniel and Anna went together, making the long ride to the territorial capital with Perkins in the wagon, and the Holloways following behind 5 people carrying 7 weeks of documented truth into the offices of the Territorial Land Commission. The hearings lasted 3 days. Silas Garrett's attorney was precisely as good as they'd feared, a smooth, deliberate man who knew how to make complexity sound like confusion, and confusion sound like doubt. He challenged the loan documentation on technical grounds. He challenged the chain of evidence regarding the fence posts. He presented Garrett as a legitimate businessman, operating within the parameters of territorial lending law. On the second day, Anna was called to testify. She had not expected to be called. Webb had told her the night before that her documentation would be entered as evidence. He hadn't said she would be asked to speak for it. She sat in the straight-backed chair in front of the commissioners, and she looked at Garrett's attorney, and she was not afraid. She was composed in the way you are composed when you have spent your whole life sitting in rooms where people looked past you and you kept paying attention anyway. The attorney opened by asking her in a tone that managed to be professionally respectful and personally dismissive at the same time, to explain her qualifications for producing financial documentation in an official proceeding. "I have no formal qualifications," Anna said. He paused. He'd expected more. "I can read a contract," she continued, "and I can do arithmetic, and I can recognize when a number has changed from what it was supposed to be." The variable clause in Mr. Garrett's loan document is on page 3 of the original, which is entered into evidence. I found it because I read the whole document, rather than the parts that were meant to be read. Mrs. Cross without legal training. A person doesn't need legal training to see that 8% isn't the same as 9.5%, Anna said. They need arithmetic and the willingness to check. One of the commissioners made a note. Garrett's attorney shifted. "Mrs. Cross, isn't it possible that your husband simply misunderstood the terms of—" "My husband's account book is also in evidence," Anna said. "He recorded every payment he made with the date and the amount for 2 years. A fixed rate at 8% calculated correctly would produce a payment that doesn't change from month to month. His payments changed every month. The math is in the record." The attorney changed approaches. "You arrived at the Cross Ranch how long before discovering this alleged discrepancy?" 2 days. 2 days. He paused to let that sit. "And you claim to have identified systematic financial fraud in 2 days that had allegedly been ongoing for 6 years. I identified it in 2 days because I had access to the documents and no prior assumption about what they would say," Anna said. "If you approach a contract looking for confirmation, you find confirmation. If you approach it looking for what it actually says, you find what's actually there." She looked at him directly. She had spent 25 years in rooms where people decided what she was before she opened her mouth. She knew exactly what he was doing, and she knew that the commissioners knew too, because the commissioners were watching her with the neutral, careful attention of men who were deciding. "Mr. Garrett has been lending money in this territory for 10 years, she said when the attorney paused. "In that time, 5 properties have experienced the same pattern: cattle lost from the east fence line in the same seasons that Garrett restructured loans, followed by Ferris acquiring land at below market value. That pattern is documented in the evidence submitted by the Territorial Land Office. I didn't discover the pattern. I just put the pieces beside each other where they could be seen." The attorney tried once more and then stopped. The commissioners asked her 2 questions of their own. She answered them plainly. Then she was thanked and returned to her seat. Daniel was beside her. He didn't say anything when she sat down. He put his hand over hers on the armrest of the bench, and she felt the warmth of it, and she looked forward at the commission table, and she breathed. The findings came on the 3rd day. Silas Garrett's lending license was revoked. His loan records were to be audited by the Territorial Land Office, with restitution calculated for all properties where fraudulent interest adjustments were identified. Franklin Ferris, and it was during the hearings that Anna learned his full name, which landed like a small shock of dark irony. Given her stepbrother's name was charged with cattle theft and destruction of evidence in a federal inquiry, and Thomas Perkins's east parcel was ordered to be reviewed for reversal of sale. Not guaranteed, not certain, but ordered reviewed, which was the first step toward something that had seemed impossible when Thomas Perkins had sat at the Cross Ranch kitchen table with his hands knotted together. Webb delivered the findings in a plain voice and without ceremony, and the room absorbed them in the particular silence of people who had been waiting a long time and were not quite ready to let themselves believe what had arrived. Anna felt Perkins in the row behind her exhale very slowly. She felt Ruth Holloway press her hand against her husband's arm. She heard Hector, who had come with them and sat at the end of the row, say something quiet in Spanish that was almost certainly a prayer, and she sat with Daniel's hand over hers, and she looked at the commission table, and she thought about the east fence, and the flour tin, and the account book, and the rhubarb, and the morning she'd woken up on a cornhusk mattress in a stranger's back room, and felt something she hadn't been able to name yet. She could name it now. Possibility. The possibility that had been there all along in every place she'd been told. There was nothing in the thistle-choked garden, in the cracked water trough, in the soft paper sack, going to weevil on a shelf in the margins of a loan document. Document nobody had read all the way through. Possibility. And the stubborn red-stalked insistence that it was still there, even after years of neglect, even after everyone had decided it wasn't worth tending. They rode back to the Cross Ranch on a Thursday, and it looked the same as it always had, the barn leaning slightly east, the corral, the kitchen garden with its new growth. The house that had held the four of them through 7 weeks of a fight they hadn't known would end this way. It looked the same, and it was entirely changed. Anna got down from the wagon and stood in the yard, and the ranch was around her, and the afternoon was warm, and Daniel Cross came to stand beside her. "Thomas Perkins," she said. "His wife's going to cry again," Daniel said. "Different reasons." Anna looked at the garden. The rhubarb in the corner was putting up new growth, a third round of stalks, red and persistent, and entirely unsurprised by its own survival. She thought about what it meant to be seen, not looked at. Seen. The specific patient act of seeing, which was not the same as approving, not the same as pitying, not the same as deciding to be generous about what you found. It was just the willingness to look at the whole thing the way you read a contract, looking for what it actually said, rather than what you'd been told to find. Daniel had done that. From the first afternoon walking the fence line, he had done that, had looked at the east fence, and listened to her explanation, and registered it not as the opinion of someone he was being charitable toward, but as information, as something worth knowing, as something that mattered. She had spent 25 years in rooms where she was furniture. She had walked onto this ranch with a broken bag and a practical plan, and somewhere between the flour tin and the rhubarb, and the loan document, and the commission chamber in Cheyenne, the practical plan had become a life. "Daniel," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for the first morning, for asking if I was hungry instead of looking at me the way everyone else did." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to hear it straight." She looked at him. "When you asked me that first morning what I was looking for, I told you I needed someone not afraid of the morning." He held her gaze. "That was true, but it was also the smallest part of what I needed." He paused. "I needed someone who looked at this place and saw what I saw, not what it was failing to be, but what it actually was. Someone who could look at the hard thing and say, this isn't broken, this is just being taken from. And here's how we stop it." The yard was quiet. Above them, the hawk that sometimes hunted the ridge was making its circle. "You gave this ranch back to me," he said. "But more than that." He stopped. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the rhubarb pie on the counter, with the expression of a man encountering something he hadn't let himself expect and was not going to make small. "You gave me back the idea that I was worth fighting for." Anna Caldwell Cross stood in the yard of the Cross Ranch and looked at the man beside her, and felt the full weight of 25 years of being told she had nothing to offer, and she felt it for exactly one more moment, and then she let it go. Not because it hadn't been real. It had been real. Every dismissal, every slid sideways glance, every Franklin's laugh and Margaret's silence, and Red Hollow curtain twitching. All of it had been real, and it had cost her in ways she would probably still be finding the edges of for years. But it was the past, and the past was where it belonged. "You were always worth fighting for," she said. "Someone just had to show up who knew it." He looked at her. His face was entirely open. No careful stillness, no deliberate control. Just a man standing in his own yard, being known by the person beside him. "You were always worth seeing," he said. "Red Hollow just couldn't do it." She nodded. She didn't look away from him. "Red Hollow's loss," she said. And Daniel Cross, who was not a man who laughed easily, laughed warm and real and unheld. And Anna laughed too. And the ranch was around them, and the rhubarb was growing in the corner of the garden they had rebuilt together, and Thomas Perkins's wife would stop crying, and the land would come back to the people who'd worked it, and Garrett would answer for what he'd taken, and none of that had anything to do with anyone deciding to rescue Anna Caldwell. It had happened because she had walked through a gate with a broken bag and paid attention. It had happened because Daniel Cross had asked if she was hungry instead of deciding what she was. It had happened because two people who had been told they didn't have enough to offer had found out together that they had exactly enough. The Cross Ranch stood on 160 acres of good Wyoming land, and the woman who had been sent there to be gotten rid of became the reason it survived, and the man who'd been losing his ranch for 6 years had not been failing at all, had never been failing, had only been waiting without knowing it for the person who would finally read the whole page. They had both been waiting for that, and neither one of them would ever have to wait again.